Hello and welcome to this masterclass on less stress, more resilience for better outcomes. I'm really pleased to welcome a few of my past and current clients as well as some new contacts today. And of course, we're recording this so that those of you who couldn't attend today can watch the recording later. This is my opportunity to thank my past and my current clients, not only for being clients, but for recommending me to others. I get 80% of my work through recommendations and referrals, so I'm very happy to be able to offer you this masterclass as a small thank you. Welcome also to those of you who are new contacts, and thank you so much for joining us. So the focus for today is stress and how to convert it to sustainable success. We'll start by looking at why converting stress to resilience matters from both an organisational and an individual point of view. We'll explore how more awareness helps with this and how you can convert stress to have more resilience. And then how all of that results in better outcomes. So why stress less? Well, firstly, I'll share my personal why with you. Prior to burning out and getting breast cancer, my stress levels were so high that at the weekend, if one of my children cried, it just sent me over the edge and I just couldn't cope. If I went out for dinner at the weekend, I fell asleep at the dinner table. I was a bit like a zombie, actually. Goodness knows how I actually got myself into that position. My body sent me lots of warnings. I had colds, minor illnesses, but it took the juggernaut of cancer to stop me in my tracks and make me realise that I had no balance at all in my life, that I'd completely lost touch with myself. This was back in 2000, and then I tried to get my medical team to agree that stress was a major contributor to getting cancer. And then they felt there was not sufficient evidence. Nowadays, there's a lot more evidence of how stress can affect the immune system and contribute to serious illnesses such as cancer. So I paid quite a high personal price for not being better at managing stress. Let's have a look at the cost to organisations. In the UK, stress-related sick leave costs 6.5 billion, and that figure's from 2012, so it could well be more now. And that figure was arrived at by taking the 10.4 million days lost to stress and multiplying it by the average cost of a sick day, which then was £618. The cost in Europe is about 25 billion euros. And in the US, 75% of healthcare costs can be attributed to preventable stress-related diseases. So stress manifests itself in a number of different ways. In 2018, 500,000 people in the UK suffered from work-related stress, and amongst women that was 89% compared to 76% of men. And absenteeism is the result of that. So in 2017, every individual affected by work-related stress lost an average of 23.9 working days. But it's not just about those sick days and people being off and absent from work. There's another phenomenon that's called presenteeism, where employees come to work, but they're disengaged, they're tired, they're demotivated, and they're too stressed to work. So that escalates the costs even further. Stress leads to lower productivity and declining or poor performance, and we'll explain why later. It can also cause conflict and aggression, poor communication, accidents and errors, and can affect customer relationships as well as internal relationships. So all in all, stress is a massive opportunity cost for any business. If those employees weren't sick or underperforming due to stress, how much value could they be adding to the organisation? It also results in higher employee turnover. 40% of turnover is related to stress. And the cost of replacing an employee is 120 to 200% of their salary. So there's a massive business case for organisations to have effective stress management programs. And this is something I get involved in with my clients, whether by helping them to design the content of that program or in taking my part in delivering the workshops that make up the program, as is the case next week. So that's the cost to organisations of not having a strong and an effective stress management program. So let's move on to look at more awareness now. The starting point for managing stress is to develop greater awareness about it at an organisational, managerial, and individual level. What impact does a high-pressure work environment have on stress? Well, in 2015, almost 3/4 of respondents to Britain's Healthiest Company survey were suffering from at least one dimension of work-related stress. The survey signals to us that time pressure is the most common stress factor. Around 60% of respondents said that their job made organising their life outside of work difficult, and more than a third said that they worked 40 hours a week or more. Both of these factors reduce work-life balance and contribute to stress. And there are a lot of organisations out there where there's a relentless drive to deliver short-term financial numbers. And in fast-paced work environments, employees tend to overload and overstimulate their minds, and they often have inadequate time to process the information that they receive. So they're making big decisions from a crowded, cluttered mind, which blocks new innovation. So we feel and act busier, but there's actually no improvement in our outcomes. There are other factors too that contribute to stress besides high pressure. The feeling that you're not getting the level of reward commensurate with the effort that you're putting in creates stress. A feeling that you have a lot of demands, but you have very little control over those demands, again, creates stress. A feeling of being disrespected and undervalued causes stress. And any sense of job insecurity is a massive cause of stress. Would you agree that we live in a very volatile, rapidly changing world? And actually, the modern equivalent of the saber-toothed tiger is change. Change is often seen as a threat to survival, and as such, it triggers the stress response. The problem is that in the business world, change is constant, and so we're constantly in stress response, which is not something that our body is designed to cope with. So what's the impact of this on performance at work? Well, those affected by the change go into survival mode. They withdraw their energy from work until they find out how that change will affect them. I've worked with many organisations helping them to lead change in a brain-friendly way. And this operates at two levels. First of all, the leaders themselves have to get themselves into a place where they can accept the change and feel positive about it and be really clear how it's going to impact them. And then they can take others on the emotional journey that change involves in a way that doesn't put them into stress response and adversely affect their performance. So it's a journey of the leaders taking themselves through change first and then being able to positively and empathetically lead their people through change. So you might say, well, is all stress bad for us? And the answer is no. A certain amount of pressure or eustress leads to optimal performance and peak efficiency. It can increase energy and drive to meet deadlines and targets. And in moderation, it leads to arousal. So you have a higher level of adrenaline that helps you meet the challenges of the task in hand. But prolonged, intense stress can lead to distress, which can affect your physical and mental health. It can cause anxiety and depression. And as it did in my case, it can lead to burnout. But on the other hand, Too little pressure or insufficient work for a prolonged period can lead to stress as well because of boredom or lack of stimulation and a lack of identity or a sense of value. And we call that rust out as opposed to burnout. So we all have different stress thresholds. And it's worth being aware, when are you in eustress or positive stress and performing well? And when do you go into distress and lose control? So that level of awareness at an individual level is crucial. So before I go any further, I just want to alert you to this offer that I'm going to make at the end of the seminar. I wanted to let you know about it now. I'm giving you quite a lot of information and ideas during this seminar, and I'd like to offer you the opportunity to have a one-to-one strategy session with me to apply these stress management strategies to your personal situation. So if you go to this link here, you'll see an application form and you can apply for one of these 4 complimentary sessions. Part of my purpose is to make a difference to people's lives, so this is one way of doing that. And I'll repeat this link at the end of the session so you can get your application in. So yes, the climate at work and the behaviour of leaders and managers can contribute to raising stress levels. But as I just said, whether something creates stress varies from one individual to another. And that comes down to their mindset and perceptions. And as Robert Sapolsky of Stanford University School of Medicine said, we human beings are smart enough to generate all sorts of stressful events purely in our heads, all linked to mere thoughts. So would you agree that fear is one of our biggest enemies as human beings? The kind of fears that disable my clients are the fear of being humiliated or looking stupid or feeling embarrassed, the fear of being judged by others, the fear of failure, fear of being wrong. And some of them have the imposter syndrome where they fear being found out. They have the fear of losing, of not being good enough, of letting others down and not being liked. Maybe you recognize some of those fears yourself, or you know people who exhibit those sort of fears. When we have these fear-based thoughts, we move into the stress response or fight, flight, freeze mode that happens from a part of our brain called the amygdala. This creates what's called an amygdala hijack. It releases cortisol and adrenaline, the stress hormones, which cause your heart rate to increase and your blood rushes to the extremities. In this state, your adrenaline is up and you're ready to move quickly. And the feel-good neuron of dopamine is down. So you're more likely to notice bad or negative things. So what effect do these stress chemicals have on our brains and our bodies? It says here, a stressed brain is a useless brain. Our brain works on electrical impulses coming in from our senses. And cortisol and adrenaline, these stress hormones, don't conduct electricity, so they stop our brain from functioning properly. And the amygdala hijack shuts down our prefrontal cortex, the front part of our brain where we do our critical thinking, where we make our decisions, and where our short-term memory is. And the reason that's shut down is because it takes a lot of energy. And when you're in the stress response, you need that energy to fight or run away, fly away. And when we go into stress response, we close ourselves down and narrow our perspective so we can only focus on the stressor or the danger. And ongoing stress negatively impacts the way we learn and take in information. So that's why we say a stressed brain is a useless brain. The Mayo Clinic, in their studies, they illustrate the difference between the brain function of someone who's overwhelmed by high levels of stress and one that shows optimal brain capacity where someone's in a sweet spot. So the optimum brain function looks like the image on the right there. It's like when you're looking down from an aeroplane and you see major cities lit up with lots of lights at night. The stressed brain hardly has any areas lit up at all. It's like when you're flying over unpopulated areas and there's hardly any lights on in the houses there. And the difference between these two brain scans is representative of the brain power your business loses, or you lose as an individual, when you suffer workplace stress. So that's why we say here, stress is our greatest enemy. But it doesn't only affect our brain. 85% of illnesses are caused by stress. And this is because our cells find cortisol and adrenaline toxic. So they close the cell doors so as not to take them in. With the cell doors shut, they're not taking in the nutrients they need. And ultimately, over time, this adversely affects our immune system. I'm sure many of you are aware that if you're stressed, that you often don't sleep well. Maybe you get to sleep okay, but when you wake up in the middle of the night, you can't get back to sleep because your brain won't stop worrying with all the things that you've got to keep thinking about. Have you ever looked at someone and thought when they told you their age that they looked older than that? Well, stress causes premature aging as well. If your body is constantly under stress, it forgets how to switch off. It's like setting a machine in motion and not knowing where the off button is. So just to demonstrate that, take your fist and hold it as tight as you can, as if you're holding onto the last diamond in the world. How does your hand feel when you're holding on so tightly? Now let go. How does that feel? Might feel a little bit numb, but then it starts to relax and feels really good. So here's the thing. When you've got that tight fist, that's how your body feels when it's experiencing the stress response. So imagine living your whole life tensed up like that the whole time. You can see how that could create problems. So what if you could do that with your body? If you could let your body go in the way that you just let your fist go? That would help your muscles to relax and allow your blood and your oxygen to flow, and would help you to get rid of toxins. So constant stress shouldn't be ignored. It kills your brain cells, and eventually it can create problems that could kill you if you ignore it. So let's think about the role of managers and leaders in stress. And there's a quote here from Simon Sinek, who says, "Stress and anxiety at work have less to do with the work that we do and more to do with weak management and leaders." And that's probably because 70% of what happens in an organization comes from imitating those leaders. So as managers and leaders, it's vital that you manage your stress, because stress is contagious. Humans are social animals. We have mirror neurons, and we mimic and reflect the behaviors of those we interact with. Our emotions and our behaviors are contagious. We mirror facial expressions, body movements, and emotions, including anxiety and stress. A study at the Max Planck Institute of Cognitive and Brain Science showed that simply observing others in stressful situations can trigger a physical stress response in 95% of people. And they measured that response by looking at the increased levels of cortisol. And the closer the relationship you have with someone, the greater the level of contagion. So our stress can rub off on colleagues, acquaintances, and even total strangers. People can catch your stress. So what are the effects of secondhand stress? Well, weakened immune system, headaches, migraines, significant changes in weight, high blood pressure, increased risk of a heart attack, insomnia, depression, poor decision making, ulcers, and digestive problems. So lots of different physical as well as cognitive effects of that secondhand stress. So if you create a stressful environment, it not only shuts your brain down, so you're unable to perform, but it also shuts the brain down of everyone around you, so they can't perform either. The fact remains that many organisations are not doing anything about workplace stress. And in 2019, if we're honest about it, there's no excuse for that. the benefits at an individual as well as an organizational level are exponential. But you're the leader of your own life, and you're responsible for your own well-being and therefore your own stress management. And I'm going to give you some tips later to help with that. But as a manager, beyond managing your own stress, really, your responsibility is to have an awareness of what the signals of stress are, how to notice it in other people, and to be approachable as a manager so people can come to you and talk to issues that are creating stress and anxiety for them. So let's move on to look at more resilience now. How do we replace the stress with more resilience? Let's start by thinking about what resilience is. Resilience gives you the ability to stay motivated and focused and to maintain your performance and stamina during periods of high load, and to bounce back from adversity and difficulties and maintain the motivation of others, and then to have high energy for not just at work but for all aspects of your life. I'm sure you're aware of the many benefits of resilience. They can include being able to stay calm and focused, having a confident presence, having better relationships, being more creative and innovative, and more agile and flexible, something that every organization needs you to be these days. So how do you develop resilience mastery? The first thing here is being on purpose. And when we discover our purpose, it keeps us more centered. It's more difficult for others to knock us off balance. But it says there, be aware, because you can get so passionate about your purpose that you can still overdo it and burn yourself out. So I work with people to identify their authentic brand purpose on a one-to-one basis. And this involves a deep dive, often that's quite moving and transformational for them. But once they find that purpose, they definitely feel a greater sense of who they are, their personal identity and how they can contribute in the world. The second thing here is about managing your energy rather than managing your time. So it's doing everything possible to keep your energy level higher and more abundant than the challenges that you're facing. And that's really the key to resilience, mastering that energy management. Exercise is really key to resilience, but not just any old exercise. It's finding an exercise that you like, that strengthens you as the instrument of resilience, if you like, so that you can achieve your purpose in life. But it's about doing something that you enjoy, because that brings you energy and resilience. Doing exercise and activities that you don't like can drain your energy and bring imbalance. So what we're saying here is find ways that you love to move your physical body, and find 20 to 30 minutes a few times a week to do that. Deal with life-damaging habits. Well, what we're referring to there is getting yourself so tired that you need artificial stimulants such as alcohol and drugs. It's making sure you've got balance in your life in relation to those things. And then humor. Avoid taking yourself so seriously. Humor and lightheartedness energize your mind, body, and spirit. So there are certain things you do need to be serious about, like the vision and the strategy and the execution. But about your role, your image, yourself, you might have a more light-hearted approach. And then there's developing mind-body awareness. Many of us are stuck in our heads, and we need to pay more attention to the messages from our body. Our body reflects everything that's going on in our lives. So start to listen to the wisdom of your body. And the way your body speaks to you is through your emotions and through energy. So develop a mind-body awareness so that you can tune into those messages that it's sending you. So continuing on with how to develop resilience mastery, well, obviously it's having a good method of managing your stress, a good approach to stress. And later on, I'm going to give you an exercise to help with that. Nurturing close relationships. There are very few things in life that instantaneously help to balance us. Love is the really key one there. So relationships are important in that. They can be a sort of an anchor in the midst of a sea of change. And this closeness doesn't come from others to us. It really starts with us having a closeness and an intimacy with ourselves first. So if our emotional bank account is low, then we can't spend it and share it with others. So the key is to love ourselves and make sure our emotional bank account is in the black. Then we'll be able to share that with others. And you might feel that love is a bit of an over-the-top word to use in the work context, but really feeling that you accept others for who they are and respect them is probably how it's expressed in the workplace. And then simplify your life. The harder we strive to improve the things in our lives, the more complex our lives become. And it's a matter of sorting out needs versus wants and connecting more with your purpose, as I said earlier. And if you're living on purpose, it's about taking small steps to move in that direction. And you can begin to simplify your life by making more choices that support your vision and purpose. And then take real holidays. Many of us go on holiday, then we do things that drain us as opposed to energize us and leave our energy bucket empty, if you like, with too much stimulation and activity going on in the holiday. And these days, people take their work phone with them on holiday and are continually answering emails, so they never really get a break. So make sure when you have a holiday, it's a real holiday. And then integrate more reflection into your life. In this fast-paced world, many of us very rarely stop to reflect. And reflection helps us to slow down. It helps us to really make good decisions. And again, I'm going to share with you a technique for reflection later. And finally, have a positive outlook on life. This creates positive chemicals in your brain, not cortisol and adrenaline, which stop your brain from working, but serotonin, dopamine, oxytocin. They make you feel good, and they do conduct electricity, so they help your brain to function optimally. And again, I'll share a bit more about that next. So, an important part of being more resilient is to know how to manage the stress response. And this is a technique I'm going to share with you now. And as we said earlier, our thoughts actually create the stress response. So it's based on a fear that we create in our minds. And this fear triggers and sets off strong emotions or the stress reaction. And ultimately, as I've explained, that causes a loss of brain power. So what we need to do is to understand how to rewire for a stress-free attitude. So this starts with awareness of our early warning signals. We might have thoughts that occur as we're approaching the stress response. So before we get into stress response, what are we thinking? What's happening in our brain? But also we might notice physical early warning systems. Some people say they have a faster heartbeat, their breathing gets more shallow, they might feel hot or clammy or even cold on their hands. And so it's about identifying and having an awareness of your early warning signals. And then it's taking a deep breath into your belly to create a pause, to slow things down. And in some instances, you might need to create that pause by actually walking away from the situation. But taking a deep breath and slowing down interrupts the stress response. When you do that over and over again, you start to hardwire that idea of slowing down and pausing and interrupting the stress response. And you start to create different thoughts in your brain, which again get hardwired. So that starts to become your automatic response when you're faced with a challenging situation. And that heightened level of consciousness ignites a neuroplastic process that strengthens a specific neural pathway made of something called GABA, gamma aminobutyric acid. And what this does, this neural pathway goes down into that amygdala, which is the brain's fear center, and it secretes something called peptides that's almost extinguish your fear reactions. And because there's no fear, then you don't have any stress response. And no stress response prevents all of those things that shut down your brain. And your prefrontal cortex remains online and available to you and assists you in making a different choice, an intelligent choice in the moment. So learning how to interrupt the stress response and to rewire your approach in challenging and stressful situations helps to keep your brain operating to a higher level. And I've explained that fairly briefly there, but if you would like to download a PDF on how to interrupt the stress response, you can do that on this link. You'll have to put in your first name and your email address, and there's a PDF where you can follow that approach to how to interrupt the stress response. So as Viktor Frankl says, between the stimulus and the response, there's a space. And in that space is our power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and our freedom. So by practicing interrupting the stress response, you're creating that space. It's a 6 to 10 second gap where you can actually have the freedom to choose how to respond as opposed to automatically responding based on the stress response. So I said earlier, it's important to have a positive mindset and to stay out of stress response, because with a positive mindset, your dopamine is up, and that's seen as a reward by your brain. And your brain then, it feels happier at the end of the day. So dopamine, serotonin, and oxytocin are the chemicals of positivity and happiness. And they found from brain scans that the happiness area of the brain is the left part of your prefrontal cortex, sort of in your left temple area. And doing things which activate this area is called making a left shift. So how do you make a left shift? There's lots of different ways. Meditation can help with making a left shift. So doing meditation for 20 minutes 3 times a week, or things like yoga and qigong, can really help with that, as can 20 to 30 minutes of fast exercise 4 to 5 minutes a day. So what are you doing to replenish your levels of dopamine? Well, there's some really simple things you can do. We've said about exercise, but just smiling, really smiling and feeling that positivity can enhance the levels of dopamine in your brain. So what about oxytocin? How do you increase the levels of oxytocin? There's a number of different ways here. If you have a pet, just stroking your pet can increase your levels of oxytocin. Having a lovely massage can do that. Or watching romantic films, dancing, making music with other people, even talking on Twitter and Facebook can raise your levels of oxytocin. So the other thing I mentioned earlier was building reflection into your life. And some people get so used to being on high alert and being fast-paced every day that they actually don't know how to reflect. So this may help. The first part of reflection is to retreat and just stand back from something and take the time to explore the possibilities and what might want to happen in that particular situation. Then, having reflected, you gather the insights and start to think about, okay, so what do those insights mean for how I might act or behave in this particular situation? And one of the things that we recommend is to keep yourself a little journal and notice, when you go into reflection practice, jot down how you're feeling, jot down your thoughts, jot down your insights. And that will help you start to develop a bit more skill in terms of being able to reflect. And then you return to the situation and act in the way that you've determined following your reflection. So taking the time to develop this skill has many advantages. It improves your self-awareness, it increases your creativity, it helps with that sense of purpose because you can make sure that what you're doing is aligned with your purpose. It makes your decisions more wise. It helps you to have more effective relationships, and it builds your resilience because you feel more energized. So building a reflective practice is one of the easiest things to do to help with your resilience. But actually, very often people opt out of that reflective practice when the pressure's on, and that's exactly when you need it most. So I think it's getting used to having a reflective practice, even in the midst of challenging and difficult, stressful situations, and that will really help you build resilience. So, more awareness, more resilience help lead to better outcomes. So let's look at what those better outcomes might be. Well, you can see on this chart that there's a lot of benefits from an organizational perspective. It leads to increased employee morale, better health levels, so lower healthcare costs. It reduces accidents and absenteeism, and it can increase productivity. So the business can save a lot of money from stress-related absence, but it has other benefits as well. We said that relationships are better because trust and collaboration improve. The working environment is better, so people feel happier. They have a greater sense of well-being. They're more motivated, and therefore they can give their best. And happier people are more productive, so there's greater productivity. And your brain functions at a higher level, so there's more creativity and innovation, and you're open to change and to learning new things. So people are able to perform better. They're able to make better decisions, more wise decisions, because their mind is clearer. But there's also brain health benefits related to having more awareness and more resilience. You maintain your ability to learn, so you stay relevant to your organization as it grows and has different needs, and you can inspire others to do the same, to keep learning and growing. And you create optimum physiology that leads to better levels of health and energy. And you build something called cognitive reserve, which research is showing now can help to reduce the likelihood of dementia and Alzheimer's disease. And I'm sure many of us have people around us in our family or within our friends' families who've experienced these terrible diseases. So anything that helps to reduce the likelihood of experiencing them ourselves is definitely worth investing in. So who wouldn't want these outcomes in their life? Who wouldn't want a workforce that has higher levels of brain power and all the benefits that that brings? So ask yourself this: are you taking responsibility for converting stress to sustainable success in your life? Are you helping yourself and your organization experience these benefits? What I'd like you to do now is just to take a moment to write down one thing that you would like to focus on to enhance the neuroplasticity and brain power of your organization and of you personally, so that you can convert stress to resilience and sustainable success. So I'll just give you a moment to do that now. So this is a recording, so there's not any opportunity here to actually ask me any questions. But if you do have any questions, feel free to contact me at suecoyne.com and I'll happily answer them. Or you might want to take up the offer that I made earlier of applying for one of my 4 complimentary one-to-one, less stress, more awareness coaching sessions. We'll take 30 minutes or so, and we'll really apply what we've learned in this seminar to your personal situation so that you can find ways of benefiting from having more awareness, more resilience, and interrupting the stress response in your life and getting all the benefits that that brings. So it's been really wonderful to be with you today. Thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to connecting with you again in the near future.